Now recording.
So, good morning, everybody. So this is a bit of a longer class. This is a 4-hour, we are scheduled for 4 hours today. And normally, how it works for me is, if it's a 3-hour class, what I typically do is I give a 15-minute break somewhere in the middle. Oh, no, sorry. Do I do 15 minutes or 10 minutes? No, normally I do 15 minutes. So we could either do 15 minutes and 15 minutes, or like run it together and do, maybe half an hour, somewhere in the middle. Like at the 2-hour mark, we break for half an hour, which is enough to go get coffee, Yeah, sound good? Any preferences? No? Long break? All in favor of long break? All in favor of short break? All abstaining? Okay. All right, sounds good. So HTML then. As stated previously, we are moving through languages with extreme rapidity in this class. We are not going to be able to do any of these languages to a great degree of depth. However, the goal of this course is more to get you an overall, overarching view of how web programming works, right? That's kind of like the highest level goal. You will be required to produce web pages as parts of your assignments. However, the web pages that you are to produce we're not going to go to an extreme degree of depth on any of the particular languages that we're going to be talking about. So, we start off where all things must in the world of HTML. Can anybody remind us what HTML stands for?
Hypertext markup language.
Hypertext markup language. Very good. So, what are the web pages we see in our browser? What are they made up of in terms of files? When we send a request URL into the browser, what's happening in order to get our files on the computer? This is the short version that sort of elides a lot of the networking stuff. So, in the most general sense, we have client-server architecture. This is something that hopefully the majority of you had a fair amount of exposure to in intro networking. Hopefully at least the difference between client and server was obvious. So basically, when you're talking about web architecture, who always initiates the communication between client and server?
Client?
Always the client, that's right. The clients, first of all, clients can be lots of different sorts of things, even sorts of things not even pictured here. Clients always initiate communication with the server. The server's only purpose is to send things back to clients when they request them. So let's just explore the concept of the client a little bit further, right? Let's draw on an example drawn from your own chosen field. Medical devices. There has been in recent years a fair amount of overlap between medical devices and the Internet of Things. Has anybody heard of the concept of the Internet of Things before? Yeah? a little bit. So the general idea with Internet of Things is that you have some device that previously was not connected to the Internet. You put a Wi-Fi module on it, have it connect to the Internet, and this provides additional features somehow, right? Part of this, you know, there, like, as with lots of things that business people get excited about over the years, there was like a kind of an explosion of Internet of Things devices. Many of them were kind of gimmicky, and the marketplace over time sort of sorted out which of these devices was actually useful and which ones were not. A good example of these, I believe, is the home thermostat, right? So when you buy a thermostat, right, if you go into like the Home Depot to purchase one, you basically have options these days between the smart version, which is connects to the Internet, connects to your mobile phone, right? And you have the quote-unquote dumb version, the version that does not have a Wi-Fi module and does not do any of those things. In general, the Internet of Things connectivity is considered an improvement. It's a feature. Generally, they charge extra for the Internet of Things version, mostly as a marketing gimmick, not really because Wi-Fi modules are all that expensive or the stuff going into them is all that expensive, as I'm sure you can understand. But the idea is that your phone and your thermostat both connect to the same server. You can issue commands from your phone to the thermostat through your network connection, right? Which you could, in theory, do remotely from the other side of the world, right? Whether it's useful to set your thermostat while you're, you know, vacationing in the Caribbean or not, you know, I'll leave that to your imagination. So you can imagine that there's a very possibly underdeveloped application of this type of technology within the medical field, right? Many of the devices that are used in hospitals are electronic, right? If you're thinking of everything from, like, you know, heart rate monitors to IVs to, you know, think about all of the different types of instruments that you can have, and each one of those could, in theory, be connected to a network connection, right? In theory, you could have, you know, and in a lot of cases probably do, readouts of patients made available over Wi-Fi to the cellular telephones, possibly issued by the hospital, of medical professionals. It's like, oh, I don't have to go into the room to see how Jenkins's heart rate is and that he's currently having a cardiac arrest. I just get an alert on my phone. Jenkins is having a cardiac arrest. Oh, I better go do something about that, right? So when we consider clients in that context, is a heart rate monitor going to be capable of displaying a web page? Okay, let me ask you another one. Is your thermostat capable of displaying a web page? Less likely, right? Right here in this class, we are talking about Web Classic, right? We are talking about the HTTPS infrastructure as it was originally designed back in the 80s, right? This infrastructure was designed as a giant distributed file system, primarily for the retrieval of web pages, right? It's a document sharing system. In the modern context, many clients no longer even have the ability to display web pages. This does not mean that they're not clients. They might just be sending information back to a server. In such cases, you don't really expect to send them a web page back, right? This gets into the idea of APIs or even REST APIs, right? This is a concept that you're likely to hear much more as you travel through, but I just wanted to make the point right now that although everything that you see in clients here has a screen and is something you would view a web page on, this is no longer universally the case. Does that make sense? Sound good? So, client-server communication. The web server receives requests for resources from clients and sends responses to those clients. For example, if a client requests website.com/index.html, the server sends back the index.html file. There are also a lot of implicit rules governing these transactions. For example, if I request website.com and I do not specify the name of the file I wish to retrieve, which is what people do most of the time, ordinarily, at least if it's an Apache server, the file which is sent back to the client is index.html or index.php. This is the default configuration of the server, right? If no file is specified, you access the home page, right? Index.html or index.php or possibly some other file extensions. That is your quote-unquote home page for the website. Does that make sense? So far, so good? The Internet Protocol Suite is a sophisticated set of protocols for ensuring all of this can happen. In this class, we are not concerning ourselves with networking details. This is a software programming class. We basically, whenever things get a little networky, I'm going to start waving my hands like this and say, and then a bunch of networking gobbledygook happens that maybe you had to learn about in another class, but I don't personally care because I'm a software guy, not a networking guy, right? There's a division of labor that happens between those two occupations. Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP, is the application layer request response protocol responsible for these types of transfers. That is to say, when you wish to request web resources, the protocol which is being used is HTTPS. So, can anybody name any other protocols? 404 is an error state in HTTP packets. It's not its own protocol.
DNS?
DNS is how you look up domains, I believe. TCP/IP is it's the underlying structure, but you can use it to send different packet types. Yes?
Is the email one SMTP?
Yeah, there we go. So SMTP is an email transfer protocol. Any other transfer protocols anybody is aware of?
TSL?
I'm not sure. I don't know what that acronym means. It's probably networking gobbledygook. So there's one that's older than HTTP, which is called FTP. HTTP is like a specific version of FTP. FTP is file transfer protocol, so it's meant for general files, not just hypertext, right? Although HTTP transfers a lot more things than just, like it can transfer any kind of file as well. You have FTP, you have such things as FTP servers. It's a different type of connection. Another one, which you may find commonly, is SSH. SSH is the secure shell. It allows you to tunnel through the network infrastructure and open up a remote session on another machine. It allows you to log into another machine over the network infrastructure, right? When we connect to CS Unix, which is our Apache server that we will be using for this class, we will be connecting to it via an SSH connection and via an FTP connection. Don't worry about it too much. We'll get there in due course. So, web development breaks itself down, roughly speaking, into two main areas of concern. People's occupations also will often break down according to these two areas. These are job titles, right? You have the front end, which is serviced by front end developers. HTML, CSS, JavaScript. That is the front end. You also have the back end, or the server side. Also, back end developer, server side developer. The server side, the language can vary quite a bit, actually. On the client, you are always stuck in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But on the server, you can actually use any programming language. There are frameworks for Java, C#, PHP, JavaScript itself. Basically, any language can be used as a server-side programming language. In this class, we will be using PHP. In our case, PHP and the database language SQL, structured query language, these are our back-end languages. We will also be using Laravel, which is a back-end framework. So far, so good? So, the client side is everything that the server is serving, right? When you render a web page on your machine, the HTML comes in, it pulls in any CSS or JavaScript that is necessary to run the page, but all of those files are downloaded and loaded locally on your own machine. It is those files that constitute front-end development. The entire purpose of server-side development is to ensure that the front-end files are delivered correctly, well, generated correctly, delivered correctly, with all of the correct information in them, right? For example, let's take an example of random social media network, all right? Let's say you log in, you want to see your feed, your posts. You open up the home page, right? That home page has been pre-populated with information stored in that website's database, right? Basically, that's all that social media is. It's a view of a database. once you're finished this course, you should have enough tools in your tool belt to be able to re-implement something like X/Twitter, at least insofar as the posting things. You know, I'm not going to talk about video, right? Video is a whole different thing. We won't really get into images either. But in terms of like being able to post comments, read comments, subscribe to comments, all of this stuff is stuff that we will have, it's territory we'll have traveled by the end of this course. Does that make sense? Question?
Do you mean this course, like this semester, or the?
This very semester, my friend. Yes. So, any questions about any of this? Good. So, let us move specifically to hypertext markup language. What is it? And what role does it play on a website? It's almost kind of a gotcha. The question itself is a little bit of a gotcha. What role does HTML play in a website? I am a website. That's what role HTML plays. HTML is the website. Everything else is layered on top of it to either make it look pretty or make it do things dynamically. CSS makes it look pretty, JavaScript makes it do things dynamically. But the page itself is HTML. Sound good? So, HTML is focused on defining the document structure by composing HTML elements, also known as tags. Tags aren't displayed to the user, but the browser uses them to, quote, render the web page. It's important to, like, the word render is fairly important here. Have you guys heard the term render used before? In Unity. Ah, yes, in Unity. So, very good. So, as Unity takes defined game objects and produces a two-dimensional view of them that it can display on your screen, that process is called rendering, right? It is taking software objects and producing something you can display with them, right? The same process occurs with HTML. The big difference, of course, is that we are not sort of trying to mathematically define three-dimensional objects for display. We are rendering a document. The specific things we are rendering are mostly words, pictures, borders, and like a couple of other things like bullet points and that sort of thing. You know, it's a text document. It may look fancy, but fundamentally, it's a text document. Make sense? So, early versions of HTML also handled style, appearance, and layout, but this was eventually dropped. So, a very important thing to understand about web development is the separation of concerns between these different languages. So, HTML, with HTML, you want the document contents, content, right? But we don't care how pretty it is, all right? We do a certain amount of layout, but not that much, right? Basically, in HTML, we write the pieces of information, we put them in boxes, but as to the layout of those boxes, that is something we we control using CSS. So CSS in general is controlling appearance. Yes?
I guess I'm really silly, but if this was a sandwich, would HTML be correct? CSS is like everything else, or like anything that's added to it.
If this was a sandwich, I would say that HTML is the meat, or whatever, you know. If you're a vegetarian, it's the falafel or whatever you put inside of your sandwich. Your sandwich contents, right? Because why do we make a sandwich, right? Because we want to take those inner bits and produce them in an easy to manage, easy to digest form, right? So CSS would in that case be the bread, right? Because for us, the bread of the sandwich is what we hold it by. It's like most of the outward appearance of the sandwich is dictated by the bread, right? That's not a silly question, that's an excellent question. Did you have a
I was
question?
about to ask the bread.
In that context, I would say that the JavaScript is probably the condiments, you know? It's like you've got the meat in the HTML, you've got the bread in the CSS, but if that's all you have, the sandwich is still a bit dry. You know? It's not the dynamic sandwich. You want the sandwich to taste good, so you put something else on it. That's what the JavaScript is. Okay? So HTML tags. Everything in an HTML document is structured using tags. In fact, I can show you. Why don't I show you how to view the HTML source of a web page? You guys may have happened upon this feature accidentally. Well, F12 is inspect, and you can get there from the Elements tab. There you go. You can also usually do view page source, which gives you like the big all-in-one, like in a new tab version. So this is the one I'm going to take a look at. So, for example, if we just take a certain portion of this, you can see it's fairly complicated, right? So you'll see here the sort of purpley pink highlighted things are tags, right? You can see I have nav, id, thing, and nav, right? Header, that one actually continues on. Button and button. So when you have an HTML tag, right? The opening tag uses angle braces. Those are angle braces, by the way, not greater than, less than. Angle braces, and inside of that, the name of what the type of tag is. P is paragraph, all right? IMG, what do you think that is? Image, very good. You then put some content, right? You then have a closing tag, right? If there's a slash right there, a forward slash, that is a closing HTML tag. It designates the stopping point for that element. Other HTML tags, some of them do not require a closing tag. So it's kind of like a one tag piece, right? Images, for example, they don't contain text, right? So all you need to say to put an image in is, I'm putting an image in, here is where to find it, and that's all you need. In those cases, these forward slash at the end of the tag indicates that this is, we are not expecting a closing tag. Does that make sense? We can probably find some examples of that in our source. Oh, by the way, this is some JavaScript. There we go. Meta tags, for example. So, does anyone care to guess what a meta tag does? What does it add?
Well, there's one that says Apple iTunes, so is it like it's kind of like a link to some social website?
That's a good guess. And Meta does not mean like the parent company of Facebook, which is a name, by the way, that they stole. No, meta means metadata. Do you know what metadata is? The best kind of data. Well, metadata is data which is attached to a file, but does not is not necessarily what you would consider the contents of the file, right? To explain the contents, or to explain the concept of meta, I will now give you the following. I'm so meta, even, have you guys heard this one before? Even this acronym. You got it? It's a joke. I'm so meta, even this acronym. What's an acronym? Oh, come on, what's an acronym? Yes, it's where you take the first letter of a series of words and make a new word from them. So what do we do? What do we get if we do that here? I, S, M, E, T, A. Right? I'm so meta, even this acronym is meta. Right? So another way of thinking about it is it's kind of like, it's a little bit like reading between the lines, you know? It's the subtext a little bit. Yes?
I have a question. How many types of content do we have in the tags? Or is it like infinite?
Oh, no, there's a predefined number of tags. In theory, any one tag can contain like an unlimited amount of information. Like you could define a paragraph that went on for a very, very long time before the computer would complain at you. But yeah, no, HTML has a standard set of tags. You don't define your own tags. Yeah. So good examples of metadata are things like timestamps on files, right? It's not like, if you have an image which is timestamped, if you like view the image, you're not viewing the timestamp. Nevertheless, if you ask for what the last modified date is, you can find it, right? When you right-click on a file in File Explorer and view properties, you are viewing the metadata. All right? So the meta tag is just a way of adding metadata to an HTML file. But you can see that is one of these self-closing tags. Make sense? So far, so good? Good. So, in addition to the tag name itself, which is sometimes called the element or element type, right? Paragraph would be the element type. Image would be the element type. Basically, there are two ways we can add additional information to the HTML tag. One is by giving the tag itself content. This is content. Right? The other way is by adding an attribute to the tag. Attributes are placed inside of the braces. All right? They occur as key value pairs. That is to say, you have certain set attribute names, an equal sign, and then the actual attribute itself, or what you're assigning to that attribute. So for example, ID is equal to output, for example, right? So we are assigning the attribute ID, the value output, for this paragraph. This becomes much more useful once we introduce JavaScript. Does this make sense? Attributes can be a lot of different sorts of things. When you're making a link, the attribute is what are you linking to. When you're creating an image, the attribute is what image am I displaying, right? When I'm, well, that's probably enough for now. So, any questions? So far, so good? Isn't it nice to have slides? Slides are good, right? Yeah. So, HTML files themselves, we save the files using the .html extension. This shouldn't be, files, right? As I said previously, the name index.html has a special meaning. This is the one that's pulled up by default if no other files are asked for. On an Apache server, if your web folder does not contain an index page, it will default to a view of all of the files in that directory. But we're getting a little bit into the weeds there. So HTML are plain text files. So this means that they are character encoded, right? HTML files can be modified by anything that modifies plain text. From something like VS Code or Visual Studio, all the way on down to Notepad, humble Notepad, right? All of these things modify plain text. This is in contrast to Microsoft Word and other word processors that create, that don't say things in plain text, right? So what it means to be plain text is that if you look in the memory itself on the hard drive, you would be able to read it, right? It's not been binary encoded. There's not a whole bunch of stuff in there that you didn't ask for, right? With Microsoft Word documents, like if we, created one and took a look at it, you would see a whole bunch of binary data. You'd see some stuff that's readable, but often not the actual stuff that you wrote in the document, right? Actually, here, I'll give you a demonstration. Let's pull up Word, blank document. The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. Save. Well, isn't this sneaky? They default to saving it on the cloud these days. Sneaky, sneaky, sneaky. No thank you, I want a local copy. There we go. So, if I take a look now inside my documents, there we go. Here's my Microsoft Word document. So, here's a little trick, right? Notepad is a plain text editor. you can open any file in Notepad and you can view the contents of that file character encoded, whether it's actually character encoded or not. So we open with Notepad. There we go. Uh-oh. That's a lot of gobbledygook. And if you and you see there's like some stuff that appears, right? But if you search for example, the word Spain, you can't find it. So now, I don't know about you. That seems like a lot of stuff to save the sentence, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain, right? Let me show you the difference with a plain text editor. If, for example, we make a new file, new text document, call it rain.txt. There we go. Actually, you know what? Betraying me once again. There we go. So, if you are a person who uses a Windows operating system, please enable file extensions. You can find this in your user settings. You are now computers professionals. It is silly for your operating system to hide your file extensions on you. You need to know it. As you can see, I thought I needed to provide the file extension, but it was already provided, so now I have rain.txt.txt, which is clearly nonsense. Rename. There we go. The default program for .txt files is Notepad itself. The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain. Save, close, and as you can see, even just by the file size alone, the Word file takes 13 kilobytes to store the same amount of data, which is stored in less than 1 kilobyte in the TXT file. In fact, if I right click, it's probably rounding up to the nearest kilobyte. If I take a look, it's probably properties. There we go. Yes, that file is 44 bytes. 44 bytes in size. Not even a kilobyte. You know how big a byte is?
Yeah.
8 bits. Right? So we could actually calculate how many memory cells this thing actually occupies, right? And it's like 8 times 44. I'll let you do the math. If we compare the Microsoft Word file, its size is 12.9 kilobytes. That is, oh wait, I actually give it to you. 13,000 bytes versus 44 bytes. That's a pretty big size difference, right? And it's because Microsoft Word is doing a lot of stuff in the back end that you didn't ask for, right? Now, the reason that we use plain text, right, is because in general, when things like compilers and interpreters and web browsers crunch through a page, they don't want all of that extra stuff. You can imagine just the added network traffic alone, right? So all of our files that we work with when we are programming are plain text files, right? So you need a plain text editor. Plain text editors, they respect that the contents of the file, they don't add in a bunch of junk that you can't see into the file. Okay? Sound good? Any questions? Okay. So in this class, VS Code is probably the one you want to go for. So, So this is our HTML hello world, doc type HTML. HTML head, this is a title, and head body, hello world, and body, and HTML. Okay? So, if you could please launch Mohawk Apps, or if you have it natively installed on your own computer, please launch VS Code. Or Notepad would also work, but let's just use VS Code. Oh, come on. Staff. Oh. Do I just do that? Yeah. Alright. Launch VS Code. Notepad++ is also a good option. VS Code lately has had a habit of betraying me, so I may at some point just switch to Notepad++. Depends on how frustrated I get with it. So, VS Code. It's always a good idea to create a new folder for whatever it is you're doing. So let's go into Documents, My Websites. Ooh, let's make, what's today's date? 2025-01-13. Yes, I want to create that folder. Thank you. There we go. There. I'm gonna kill the lights. There we go. That should help certain members of the class get a better nap in. So, in VS Code, creating a new file is fairly simple. You have the new file button right here at the top. Click that, give it a name. Let's call it index.html. There we go. Now we are coding. So, in VS Code, there is a way to insert a certain amount of, not necessarily necessary, but useful code into an HTML document automatically. This is called an Emmet abbreviation. If you type the exclamation mark character and press enter, you see you will get quite a lot of useful information. You don't have to worry about too much of this. Doc type HTML tells us that this is an HTML file as opposed to an XML file, which are formatted very similarly. HTML language is equal to English. Whatever language your website is written in, you should put that language code there. This allows online, like in-browser translators to detect what they should be translating from, which is generally actually how it works, rather than like some kind of mysterious algorithm by which it detects what language is going on. Generally speaking, it doesn't do that. So, title. Title is the name of the web page which appears in the tab. So for example, my website. Head is the region of the HTML document which contains data not intended for the page itself, not intended for display, but which is otherwise necessary. So for example, metadata about what a viewport should be, what the character set is, metadata, including the title itself, which is the title of the document, which appears in the tab. The tab is not the same thing as the viewport. So, body is where we put all of the contents of the web page. So, for example, if I were to write, the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain, save, going to our web page, open with Chrome or anything you like, anything but Edge really. The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain, and you can see that, again, as I said, the name of the tab, my website. Looking good? So far so good? Good. So, there's something very important about HTML documents that I'd now like to show you. She sells seashells by the seashore. So, taking a look at this, how would you expect the text to render? Probably on two different lines, right? Let's take a look. By the way, if you hit Control-R to reload the page, that will update the page with any modifications you've made to the HTML file, assuming that you saved them. So, although in the HTML file, I suppose I don't, is this visible to everybody in the room? Yeah? I'm used to rooms that are like, go back a lot further. That's good, I can get more on screen. So, you would expect she sells seashells by the seashore to be on a different line, right? But it's not. One might ask the question, why? The answer is websites, HTML pages, gobble white space. That is to say, if there's extra white space, it doesn't render it. Another way that you can demonstrate that is, let's just put a bunch of spaces in there, save that, reload, whoops. Those spaces are also not showing up. Interesting. So, you can think of perhaps a few different ways that you could take advantage of this, having things sort of formatted here as they are not formatted over there. But in general, if this is what you want, two sentences on 2 lines, there are 2 ways to make this change. A preferred way and a not preferred way. All right? Good form and bad form. I'll show you the bad form first. There is a tag. BR stands for break, also line break. The break tab will insert a line break. You will get what you expect. In general, the only accepted use, the only standard accepted use of the break tab in a website is when you are writing down poetry. Now, this is not a creative writing class. I'm not expecting anybody in the room to produce any poetry. So likely our use of the break tab will be, it's also useful for sort of quickly formatting forms. But part of the problem here is that using the break tab means that we're doing too much formatting in HTML as opposed to CSS. When we use HTML tags, we want to use them semantically. That is to say, we want the tags to be used according to what the tags say they are, right? So in this case, we are distraught because our two lines, which we expect to be on two different lines, are actually on the same line. Yes?
What if we want to make two breaks? Like, I mean, two lines, this break.
Break, break. But again, discouraged. The correct way to do this is to take this text and place it inside of paragraph tags. If these are two different paragraphs, they will be on two, like a paragraph implies a line break at the end of the paragraph. If these are two different paragraphs, they will appear on two different lines. There we go. Further, you know, if we had more text, that more text appears like as a proper paragraph, right? So P means paragraph, right? Text will render without the paragraph tag, but if we tag it as being a paragraph, then we know that that text is intended as like block text inside of the document. It seems a little clunky, but there are, you know, this is what HTML is. You are inserting tags to format things instead of just relying on your, your Microsoft Word kind of increase, decrease font size controls, that sort of thing. So, shall we talk headings? Any questions about paragraphs? Okay. Headings then. have 6 layers of heading. As it renders in HTML, a heading gets its own line. H1 is the biggest and strongest heading. H6 is so small and insignificant, as you can see, H4 is actually about the same size as the paragraph text. H5 and H6 are headings which are actually smaller than the body text of the page. So when would you use them? Probably rarely. Personally, I find H1 is a bit too bold most of the time. I'll generally default to an H2 with an H3 as a subheading. But in the same way that we open and close our tags and we say what these things are, right? These are headings. We do the same thing. We are using the tags semantically. So, in a document, what does a heading do most of the time?
It's what it is, it's web pages. It's like you click on an article, and you can sure how to read.
Yes. Well, funny you should mention articles. Let's take a look at Wikipedia. So, the headings. This is a heading. This is a heading. This is a heading. How are headings being used in this article?
Titles.
They are titles of what? What is this thing? Well, relative to the document, right? The article is divided into sections. That's right. So headings, the thing they are heading in general is a section of a document, right? You are dividing the document using headings in general. Does that make sense? Like, this is clearly an example, right? You wouldn't normally find a website that looked like this unless it was made by a high school student as a prank or for an assignment. Make sense? Any further questions? Any questions? Yes.
Just from playing around, I've noticed that you can't make notes on HTML the same way you would on like C#.
Ooh.
How would you do that?
So HTML does have a comment character, but it's weird. This is a comment in HTML. Strange. Right. I think it might be 2. Yeah. So a tag which goes exclamation point 2 hyphens starts a comment, and 2 hyphens closing angle brace is the end of the comment. Those function the same here as they do in other programming languages. I'm curious. Let me just see for a moment here. Well, first of all, you can see it's not been rendered into the page. Let's take a look. Inspect elements. Aha. So the comments do appear in your inspector. They are. It's not like they're not sent from the server. They are sent from the server. They do appear in your elements page, but you know, most of the time, the only comments I ever see in HTML are students putting in like their statement of authorship. You will find comments to be very rare in the wild in HTML. It's not like other places. Like if we consider Google itself, right? You'd expect it to maybe have some comments. It's like, yeah, it has a couple, right? Not that many.
So you can edit the page.
Oh yeah, totally. Where's the edit?
I just double click. So that was up to HTML. Or that was the one we made.
Edit as HTML. There we go. Hello world. Hello world should have. There it is. There you go. So, I have not vandalized Google. Nobody can see this change except me. These changes were not pushed to the server. Don't worry, we didn't just hack Google. All right. So essentially, all we did here, when we connected to the server to retrieve the copy of the web page, we got that file, right? In here, we edited that file, and then re-rendered the page with our edited copy. If we refresh the page, that change will go away. Ta-da! So, does that make sense? You can do the same thing with JavaScript. The impermanence of the changes to the page are important. However, now that you know, you may now perform acts of mischief with your significant others / roommates. There's, there's a, here's one you can do in JavaScript. This one's fun. Alert. Hi, Alexandra. I'm watching you. Very nice. Or perhaps if you go to like youtube.com, go to there we go, elements. Oh man, you just have to pick a good point to insert it at. Edit as HTML. Whoa, okay. Like say right here, say stop procrastinating and get back to work. That should have appeared somewhere. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Well, you'll probably be able to find somewhere that you can put that in, It's kind of a shame.
That only saves to that one YouTube page, so if like you opened YouTube in another tab,
It wouldn't, yeah.
you would refresh it.
Yeah, basically in order to in the same way contaminate every page automatically that, your significant other is visiting, you would probably need to write and sneakily install a browser extension, or just write a virus. That would also work. Most people don't, most viruses these days don't mess with you like that, because they're trying to be sneaky and steal stuff from you, so they don't want you to know that you have the virus. But, back in the day, people used to write viruses just to mess with people. Okay, so, good comment about comments. So, okay. Is there anything you'd like to know, like how to do in a web page? I will open this up to, requests from the audience. Yes?
How do you, this might be the CSS, but how do you put tabs
So, what you are asking about is a nav bar. That's what it's called. In order to have different pages, like home page and about, you need actual different HTML files. So let's make a new HTML file. About.html. Insert boilerplate. There we go. H2 and H2. My about page. Hi everybody. My name is George Francesco. I live at 124 Street Name Avenue in City, Province, and my social insurance number is 444 444 424. There we go. And paragraph. So, that's a joke, of course. So, it's now interesting to us to talk about, now that we have multiple files, let's go over a couple of things. First, let's pay some attention to the URL address bar up here. So, there is a big difference between loading our files from our local hard drive and loading them from the internet. As you can see, it is given to us that this is a file. This is something of a misnomer. Everything that you view on all web pages are files. What this means is this is a local file. This is a file local to your file system. In fact, if you take a look, file : / and then the position on the hard drive of the file, right? This would be different with a real web page. You would go through DNS, you would get the websites like .com, .ca name, and then if you wanted any subfolders there, you would include them afterwards, right? So this is a local file. We may look at other local files by modifying this about.html. And there you have it. There's the page that we just made, where this person very wisely has put their social insurance number. So, by the way, if that person exists and has that same social insurance number, I apologize for releasing your social insurance number on my public YouTube video. However, I think the chances are so infinitesimally small that I'm going to just go with it. So, so we have the About page, we have the Index page. It would be useful to be able to get from one to the other using some kind of mechanism for connecting documents, you know, like connections in a chain. Is that what we call those when you have a bunch of chain links and you connect them? What's that process called again? Linking, that's right. We want to be able to link pages. Not just link them, hyperlink them. So, this shall introduce. So, instead of doing the nav bar immediately, let's just do a regular link, and then we can do a nav bar. Okay? So, the tag name for a link is A. This about page. There we go. So we have a link to the About page, and on the About page, at the top, we have a link to the Home page. Looking good? So if we just take a look to see how that renders, you can see the text appears, but it's not a link, right? There is one more thing that we need to add in order to actually link to the other page. We need to tell the link where we're linking to. To do that, we use an attribute called href. Href is equal to about.html in the case of index, and on this one, href is equal to index.html. So, you can see, reloading the page, we now get the typical underlined link appearance. This takes us to the home page, about page takes us to the about page. Cool, right? So, that's a link. Now, if you wanted, if you want it to look like nice and fancy, we're not there yet. Making things look nice and fancy is the job of CSS, and we're not there yet. But there is one other thing that we should throw in here in order to, because like if we intend to make a nav bar, we should make a nav bar, right? So I'm just going to look up the specific syntax. W3 schools. I'm not ashamed to look it up in class. HTML nav bar. Not CSS. See? Top hit is CSS, right? So. Sorry? Yes. So nav has been supported by, for example, Firefox since 4.0. I don't know what Firefox version we're on right now, but I suspect it's probably in the 40s.
It's Opera, right?
Yeah, that's Opera. Opera's a pretty good browser, actually.
I've only ever seen YouTubers like advertise it. I never really know.
People still use Firefox?
Hmm?
Do people still use Firefox?
I don't think so. I think Firefox is largely falling out of favor. Help about Firefox. Oh yeah, no, pardon me. We're on version 134. So it's been a while since nav was supported. Yeah, I know that Firefox was like very popular a number of years ago, but basically,
15 years ago?
yeah, like at least a decade ago, it's been since Firefox was really popular. Basically, Chrome came along and destroyed it, you know. And because Chrome is like a bit more open source, there are a lot of the sort of smaller browsers that you see are actually Chrome variants. Like the one that I personally use is called Brave. You guys heard of this one? Let me show you. Here we go. So, aside from all of the, all of that stuff, basically it's got built-in ad block, basically, which is very nice. The ad block on Brave is better than like if you were to get a browser extension for any of the other things. Like you have to keep in mind with like Google, right? Google owns YouTube, right? YouTube makes money through ads. Is it in Chrome's best interest to allow you to block ads on YouTube? No, it's a conflict of interest though. And basically these guys took the Chromium base and like stripped out a lot of the stuff where Google is also tracking you in secret. So it's actually faster than Chromium because it's faster than Chrome because it's just not doing a lot of the extra stuff that Chrome does in the background. But and if they want to sponsor this YouTube video, they should get in contact. Now accepting sponsorships. That's I actually do use Brave because I can't stand YouTube ads, and I'm too cheap to pay for the subscription. So there you go. Never trust the client. Where were we? Yes, links. So it won't have much of an effect right now, but we can put this link inside of a nav, right? We've only got the one, but similarly to W3 schools, we would put like if we had a few pages, we would put a few pages here, right? Make that change here as well. Like, the purpose at this level with HTML is not so much to tell the browser, it's not to really greatly modify how the web page looks. You'll notice that having added the nav tag does nothing for the appearance of the website. However, now the browser knows, hey, that's a navigation area, right? So, whether you want to do your navigation as like a bar across the top with a bunch of links, right? Or perhaps you're on a mobile device and you want like one of these little icons in the corner which pops out a pane that says A, B, C, and D, right? Using the nav block and not specifying whether it's like a banner nav or a drop-down nav means that the browser gets to decide how to render it based on the browser itself, right? A mobile phone can render this way, a desktop can render things that way. The HTML is the same between both of these versions. Does that make sense? So, and by the way, now that I've brought up the issue of mobile devices, what do you think people most commonly look at websites on? Is it desktops or mobile phones? Should I play the Jeopardy music? Phones? How many people think phones? How many people think desktops? You are correct, of course. Most people view websites with mobile phones these days. So, when you are designing your website, you should design it for a mobile phone. Mobile first, desktop second. Now, this is actually quite a tricky area. There are lots of libraries and frameworks to help make that transition. We will be studying one of these called Bootstrap a bit later on in the course. For the time being, let's just keep rolling, you know. Let's not worry too much about these extra concerns. Okay? So, in-class activity. All right? Take the website that we've been making so far, add another page that says something, I don't really care what, link to it from both of the existing pages and produce links from that page to the other two. Okay? So add one more page, please, to your web application. We will take, 10-15 minutes. Please practice. Would you like to see the code? Yeah. Question?
Does it matter what, like, the one page we called it index HTML, the other one was about, does it matter what we call this one?
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me what your additional page is about. I don't really care about the content. All I care about is, can you make the page, you know? We're going to do images pretty soon. I appreciate that you're getting it ready. Yeah. Just make sure to link them all. When you say lost. And while you're at it, download a couple of images. Just images off the internet. Doesn't matter what file extension. how are we doing on that task? Got it? Still working on it? Either hand? Oh, using that. Now, if you want to do things differently, that's the job of CSS. Right now, we just want to get the bare content on the page. Okay, are we ready to move on then? Yeah? Okay. So I'm going to do the same thing. New file. By the way, HTML, better or worse than Unity so far? Gallery.html. So, I will link to the gallery. In both places. There we go. So, in this gallery, let's make it gallery heading to notable ducks of history. There we go. Now, I wish to include image files, including blah 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 blah. Image files use the img tag. You also need to specify the source attribute, src. Here, you simply use the file name of the image that you are wanting to import. The image must be in the same folder as the HTML file for this to work. Alright, it's not going to go digging into your My Pictures folder to find the image that you think you want. Most particularly if you upload this to a server. Right? If you upload this to a server, all files on your local file system will not be accessible. So, keep everything in one folder, please. Duck1.avif. There you go. You can, of course, produce several. JPEG, and PNG. So, let's see how that renders.
Oh, like that.
Yep. Well, let's just say resolution is something of an issue. It would be nice if these gallery images were constrained so that they were each a specific width, right? Now, in an actual real sense, we are going to start to stray a little bit into CSS territory to get these guys looking okay, right? But in this case, it's like, if we don't, then this is not acceptable, right? If you were to submit this as an assignment, I would say, come on, right? So, HTML tags can contain more than one attribute. That's right, folks. So let's say width is equal to. Now, we come to, there are a couple of ways of specifying this, right? The first way is to, so basically, like, you need to specify it, but you also need to include the number of units, like what the units are. That's why this is a string and not a number, right? If I were to say something like 300 pixels, like that, I get 300 pixels, right? If I were to say width is equal to, oh, let me, you know what, I'm gonna throw some break tags in here because I'm not supposed to, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So all of my ducks are on a different row. Now I've got all my ducks in a, well, I have all my ducks in a column, not a row, but that's okay. Width is equal to 25%. When you specify a percentage, that percentage is percentage of the width. So you can specify, I want this image to be half of the size, quarter of the size, whatever you want as a percentage. There are a couple more exotic ones as well. Width, like say maybe 4 cm, I think that'll work. Oh, that might be an error actually. Oh no, there it is. Very, very small. Is it just taking that to mean pixels? It seems like it's taking that to mean pixels. Yeah, it's just taking that to mean pixels. Okay. Well, between pixels and percents, that's all you really need anyway. You could say something like, 25% of all there you go. So the question is, if I've got 25% for each of these, why is this guy not in line with the other guys? Aside from his, general disposition. Yes?
For the margins?
That's right. The percentage does not take into account the margins. So, in reality, if you want this, you'll have to say something like, 24.5 on each of them. And there you have it. I now have all of my ducks in a row. Any questions? As I said, I will reiterate, a certain amount of messing around with this is necessary for the web page to be kind of generally viewable. But once we start introducing cascading style sheets, not only is directly modifying the width property like this, like it's discouraged to do it here, you should be doing it in the CSS file, right? And that way, you write, basically the way CSS works is you write one rule that will apply to each of these situations, and then it just applies, and you don't have to write in width is equal to this in each one of those. It's, you know, like that thing we like to do in programming where we parameterize things so that we only write things in one place and then we apply it a bunch of times so that we only have to modify it in one place? Well, that's basically what CSS does, but for styling. Make sense? So far, so good? Any questions? Yes?
I played around on like Bluehost before, and on there, you can edit things through code, or you can like pick a theme and edit it that way. Would like the theme of a page, and you using somebody else's theme, essentially be like a CSS?
You can use CSS to construct the theme, but or you can construct a theme. So another one of the things about CSS, right, is once you've written a CSS file, I could apply my CSS file to each one of my HTML pages, right? So I might have like, one CSS file that is, blue theme, and apply that to whatever page is open. I might have another CSS that is pink theme, right? And then I could allow the user to like select between which CSS file is being loaded somehow, right? Reload the page in pink theme type thing. So totally something you can do. So yeah, CSS, like wherever you've seen an implementation of website themes, CSS is running it. But you don't just like specify a theme, right? The closest you get to that is using dark components in Bootstrap. Like Bootstrap has a bunch of components that you can, like basically pre-built CSS rules that you can load and apply to certain page elements. And like a lot of them have dark mode variants, right? Which you just, like you specify in the name. So yeah, like this is the type of thing that you would use to implement a dark mode, basically. Question?
Do I put this on the internet? Like,
How do I put this on the internet?
Yeah, make it an actual website that you can visit.
We could do that. So, you guys want to see how to put a website on the actual internet? So, so you guys won't have CS Unix accounts all like yet, but could someone please send me an email to remind me to bug IT to make accounts for you guys, if you wouldn't mind. So client-server relationship, right? In order for the server to serve these files, the server needs these files. So we need to perform a file upload to a server. Now, the server, you must have a valid account with whatever server you're uploading to, right? Either that or own it yourself, which I don't recommend. So you need a couple of applications. Number one, in Windows at least, for Mac users, you can perform a lot of these functions from terminal. But for poor, humble Windows users, you have PuTTY, and you have WinSCP. So, get out of here, back. There we go. So, the server, which we will all be connecting to, is called csunix.mohawkcollege.ca. I will write it on the board. This is your so-called host name. You will also require a username and password. Once I set up the accounts for you, your username will be SA, lowercase, followed by the 9 digits of your student numbers. You will then also have a password, which I believe defaults to something like your birthday in some way, but just like once the accounts are created, I will go in and I assign you temporary passwords, and then you can use those to log in. I'll send a bunch of emails out, okay? So if you open a connection to csunix.mohawkcollege.ca from PuTTY, PuTTY is an SSO. Actually, you know what? I'm going to increase the font size. The appearance. There we go. Don't worry about that. There we go. So, look away, everybody. There we go. So, I have right now logged into my account on CS Unix. This is a bash terminal, right? I just wanted to show you that this is possible and how it works, because basically you guys won't have to do pretty much anything here except your password resets initially. But once I've got your accounts created, we'll do that in class, and it won't be a big deal, okay? Now, this is a Linux bash prompt, so let me just show you the structure of the accounts here. This is an Apache server. This is a very classic way of doing the internet, by which I mean to say it's a bit outdated and outmoded, but this is the equipment we have to deal with. So, essentially, this is the structure. One of these days, one of those is going to come down on my head. So, the server has a folder for user accounts. It has a folder called home. These are actually called directories. Inside of home, there is a directory for each student account. So, you might have a folder for SA 000123456, and folder for SA 000234567, etc. Right? There are an awful lot of them. like pretty much every student that's gone through the 559 program has an account on CS Unix. I think they delete them after a certain amount of time, but like there are a lot of accounts on CS Unix. But anyway, so inside of your folder, your student folder, imagine this was your student number, you will have several subfolders. Well, a couple anyway. The most important one is public underscore HTML. Right? Anything you put in this folder is on the internet. And I mean the internet proper. I mean people can find it with a Google search. Right? So, Apache servers have a particular way that their URLs are organized. If inside of public HTML I put index dot, or actually let's not call it index, let's call it a.html. Alright? The way that we address things in the URL address bar to access that file specifically is as follows. https:// csunix.mohawkcollege.ca/ so this is your, what's that called? That's your domain, that's right. That's your domain name. After the slash, we have tilde, SA, in this case it would be 0, 0, 0, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, slash. So that is your user name, right? Slash a.html. That would access this file. Does that make sense? So, let's imagine that we had a folder inside this, right? So let's say we had a folder. We called this folder topics. And inside this folder we had a file b.html. Does anybody care to guess what the URL would look like to access b.html? What would we change? Yes?
Would it go to student number and then another slash for topics and slash b.html?
Very good. So to access b.html, it's the same up to this point. After that, it's topics/b.html. Very good. There's one other important part that you need to know about. Your public HTML folders will contain a special folder private. When you are working on your assignments, it is necessary that you work on them in the private folder, because if you work on them on the public folder, that is public to the general internet, including your classmates. I probably don't have to have this conversation with you guys, but I certainly do in the other program. If you put your files up on the public portion of your CS Unix account, and then somebody takes them and submits them as their own work, you would get nailed for plagiarism, because you didn't sufficiently and adequately protect your work from being copied, right? You must upload things to your private repository, or your private folder. Basically what that means is if I try to access it, I have to enter your password to see it. Which is fine if you're you, but if you're not you, that can probably be problematic. So it has the added bonus side effect of thwarting criminals. Private / etc. However you want to put things inside of there, that's up to you. But yeah, does that make sense? So far so good? Cool. I know that many people are probably not, gotta turn that back on. Probably you guys are not so familiar with command line interfaces for Linux stuff just yet. Although I understand that you guys are taking a course this semester which will probably result in you using that stuff. Operating systems, yes.
We use the command.
Say a little louder, please.
We use the command prompt and for pushing buttons.
Good. Do you know why you want, was it explained to you, what the purpose of the command prompt is and why it's good and useful?
Didn't explain anything to us.
Okay.
To use it to access websites and useful changes. Websites.
Yeah. So there are two reasons. There are two reasons that you want to, there are three reasons that you want to become familiar with command line interfaces, all right? The first is there is stuff that you can do with them that you can't do any other way, right? Some, particularly in Linux, right? Some tools are command line only. You can only use command line to use them. So, for example, some of your networking diagnostics, like NetStat or something like that, those are command line tools. They have no graphical user interface. If you want to see it, you must do it in the command line. So that's number one reason, but that's not like a philosophically good reason.
Yeah.
You use it because you have to. That's not a good reason to, I'm trying to give you zeal for the command line, right? So number one, you have to. Number two, oh man, okay. Did I lose one of my points? Okay. So number two, all right. Any command that you enter into a command line interface can be written in a file and executed instead of you typing it, right? This is called scripting. And I think if my memory serves of your operating systems class, you will be learning some bash scripting. Perhaps you've already started, perhaps it's a little early for it. But bash scripting is as good as a programming language. It can do everything that a programming language can do. And it can do a lot more because it's like the functions in bash scripting are actual command line programs, right? So So let's say, just for the sake of interest, you're maintaining a server or doing some kind of work, right? And there's some task that needs to be performed, like, you know, every Friday after, you know, after everybody logs off at the end of the day, right? You know, maybe you need to clear caches or something, right? You can write a script that performs that work, schedule that script so that it executes without you having to execute it. This is far superior to you hanging around the office until 7 o'clock just so you can type in, you know, execute clear cache command, right? You can do more work more efficiently if you know how to script the command line, but in order to know how to script the command line, you first have to know how to use the command line, right? But yeah, anything that you enter in here, you can write a script to do the same thing by just taking those commands directly and putting them into a script. Does that make sense? There are, lately most of the programming that I've actually personally been doing has been bash scripting. And this is because I'm using bash scripting to do all kinds of useful things. Like, I'll give you an example of like one thing. I'll give you an example from my server-side programming class that I taught last semester, right? So I have written a bash script which assists me in grading students' work, right? Now, it's not making determinations about what marks to give people. All it's really doing is taking files and moving them to the correct folder so that I can get them to like display in a browser without me having to do that manually, right? It's doing other things besides, right? One of the things that the script does is it goes through and counts up how many comments are in a file as a percentage of like the total amount of file there is. Which, you know, I don't base marks on it, but it's nice to see, okay, this person has actually no comments in their file. You know, that's useful information for me for marking, right? Another thing which I do, they are, in that class, they are supposed to submit through Canvas and do a simultaneous submission through CS Unix, right? Those two copies have to match exactly, right? But, you know, basically the CS Unix version isn't time-stamped, so sometimes what people do is they try to sneak bug fixes in after the deadline, right? Part of my script downloads the copy, they upload it to CS Unix, compares it to the version they submitted to Canvas, shows me where there are any discrepancies between those two copies. So basically I've written it in so that it automatically checks to see if people tried to sneak any bug fixes in after the deadline, right? To do that manually would be like impossible, you know? If I've got 100, like what am I gonna do, you know? I've got 100 students, I'm gonna pick through like, you know, 200 lines of code each to look for like, oh, they changed a period for a comma right there, you know? Even I'm not that good, right? So yeah, bash scripting, that's the reason that you want to learn the command line interface, is because like, you can do so much more with it. Like the skill cap on bash scripting is higher than programming languages, in my opinion. It takes getting used to, right? But once you're used to it, you can become like one of those types of people who gets done in an hour, literally what it takes other people days to do. So, yeah. Like, for example, using my script, before I wrote my script, marking one student assignment took maybe 5 or 6 minutes. after my script takes 1.5 minutes. Multiply that by like 120 students, you're looking at significant time savings, right? Precious minutes of my life that I now get to spend doing more interesting and useful work, right? Yeah, like not grading papers on weekends and spending time with my family, for example. So, anyway, enough about that. Let me show you, let me finish this. I realize we're over time for the break. Let me finish this and then we'll go on a break, okay? So, there is another program called WinSCP. You log in the same way, right? Same username, same password. Come on. There we go. This provides a somewhat more digestible, regular file interface to the same thing. This is my local system. This is the server's file system. I can go into my public HTML page. Let's make a new folder, because this is now new directory, winter of 2025. Good grief, where is the decade going? Now, if I want to pull in a copy from everything here, you just drag and drop, performs the upload, and now, if I go to csunix.mohawkcollege.ca/tour, there you go.
That's the, I saw there was a
Yeah.
snake on PNG, I was like, I wonder what
I
that
was
is.
Is that
also
nice?
wondering what
One of my former students made this for me. The reason is that I snap my fingers and half of the class passes and half of the class fails.
They should put that letter in.
There we go. More winter 2025. Obviously, I'm going to stash this in a subfolder. I won't just leave this here. But there's our website. About page. There you go. Gallery. There you go. This is now, and actually, you can do this on your own computers too. Like if enter this URL into your browsers, please, for a moment. You will see that this is now on capital V, capital Internet. Capital T, V, capital I, Internet. There you go. You can't find it?
No, I can see from here.
Oh, sorry. I can blow it up for you. So that is how you get something on the internet. In general, you need a server. Things have been made slightly easier for us because Mohawk College has this server that it runs and administers for us, right? If you were out in the wild, shall we say, you would need, number one, you would need to register a domain. There is a small fee for registering a domain. Last time I checked, it was about $20-25 a year to register a domain. Then, once you have a domain registered, you have to convince someone to give you server space or server time. You know, in my case, I have a friend who has all kinds of, you know, he has his own servers and he does all kinds of stuff with servers. So, you know, when I have had the very occasional need for something like this, I hit up a friend. But, you know, there are companies that sell server time and server space. These days, what you most often do is you go to the cloud, right? Rather than having, you know, some guy somewhere who has a server who you rent space on. Cloud is like basically the same thing, but it's a bunch of server farms in the States and it's administered through APIs and that kind of thing. But yeah, does that make sense? Any further questions? Just one?
The WinSCPs and those are better than
They're different tools for different purposes. You'll need PuTTY in order to change your password once I can issue you the temporary password. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, so the app that we have to download on our phone devices to do assignments, is it CS Unix or which one?
Oh, no, there are two applications that you need. PuTTY and WinSCP. Those are the two tools that you
You
need.
said for Mac,
Both or
we
for
don't
Windows?
use PuTTY.
Oh, Mac, open terminal SSH command does the same thing as PuTTY and SCP as, you know, WinSCP. SCP does the same thing as WinSCP. If you want like the files to appear, I recommend FileZilla. FileZilla, which is an open source FTP client, which looks a bit more like that. But yeah, there's really no point in not using SSH if you're on a Unix-based system, which Mac people are. So I could, for Mac people, I'm absolutely happy to show you how to get into it. Basically, open up terminal, type in bash, that'll get you all of the bash commands, and then you just use SSH. Okay, any other questions? All right, I hereby declare a half an hour break. We shall resume class at 2:45. All right, on our way. So, let me see if there's any more, yeah, I sort of stopped the slides, and we had a long digression from the slides. I'd like to clean up what little remains of the slides.
Yours,
So-
like, time, right?
It would be nice if these were numbered, eh?
It is numbered, right?
Yeah, we were on this one. So, HTML structure, we've gone through a fair amount of it. So, head section versus body section. Head tags contain meta information about the document. The body is the document. Headers and paragraphs are very important. We will do lists, tables, and forms, spans, and divs. We will do all of these presently. I think we'll start with spans and divs. So, but let's just finish this off first. A web browser can open an HTML file and render it as a web page. i.e. the browser does not display the HTML file contents directly, as we have seen, because otherwise we would have all kinds of tags interspersed, right? The browser uses the HTML code structure, the browser uses the HTML code to structure the document it is rendering. For example, it's looking for headings. Headings are denoting sections. It's thinking about the document as having sections, right? Most browsers have a file open option on the menu that allows you to open an HTML file on your local machine. We've already done this. So, as stated previously, W3 Schools is perhaps the one-stop shop for HTML reference. So let's go back and learn the rest of these constructs. We've got tables, lists, forms, and spans / is. Tables, lists, forms, spans, and divs. So, let's do spans first, shall we? So a span is a segment of text that you'd like to do something a bit different with. The span itself doesn't render as anything, but it allows us to tag a piece of text for later use by CSS or JavaScript. So for example, span, Spain, and span. I'll show you just a little bit of inline CSS in order to sort of demonstrate the concept. Style is equal to color, red. If we rebuild this, oh, this is CS Unix. Okay, important thing to realize about the server. Changes you make locally do not get pushed to the server automatically. You must manually do that. So, here. There we go. As you can see, the word Spain is now red. Make sense? So far so good? So that's what a span is for. You take a certain segment of text, you label it, you do something with it, it doesn't otherwise interrupt the flow. Something that does interrupt the flow is a div, or a division box. Division boxes are extremely common inside of web programming. Basically, anytime you want to group a set of elements together in one sort of, draw a box around it, whether that box is invisible or visible, then that's a div, right? So, for example, let's say I wanted to group these two paragraphs together. Div, close div. We can also apply style properties to divs. When we apply a style property, so let me back up a little bit. So what we're doing here by introducing the div is we are introducing a hierarchical structure, or a more hierarchical structure, to our HTML page. It's going to be important to think about HTML in a hierarchical way. Where's my marker? That one will do. So at the moment, if we analyze the structure of this web page, let's ignore all of the headings for the moment. We get the following. If we we take a look at with the, let's just imagine body is at the top, right? Under body, we have nav, and we have div. Under nav, we have 2 links. Under div, we have 2 paragraphs. And under the first paragraph, we have a span. Right? We can see how, by nesting these elements together, different elements form a hierarchy. Make sense?
Yes.
This hierarchy is called the document object model. All right? And it has implications in terms of such things as applying style. So, for example, if we have conflicting styles, things that are lower down the hierarchy will override things higher up the hierarchy. So, for example, if I apply style color is green at the level of the div, but the span is saying that color is red, let's see what happens. Save that. Refresh. You can see that everything inside of that div turns green. Everything that's a child of the div, which is the parent, right? Except for the word Spain, which is still given in red. The span element overrides the rule given up here. Does that make sense? Good. So, divs are very, very common in web pages. If we take a look at this source that we were looking at earlier, if you just sort of take a quick look through, right, particularly in this section, you see how many div elements we have? Div is quite common. Div, in fact, can we just highlight them all? Yeah. You can see how common divs are sort of in your general web page. And my canvas is not, it's not different in this respect. Like this is common to a lot of web pages, right? So, divs. Make sense? It's a little tricky to master the divisions, but once you've really come to grips with it, you'll be able to make some pretty cool and interesting designs. Any questions about spans and divs? Yes.
Can you show the code again first? I just want to see the syntax of span.
Sure. So, this style attribute, technically speaking, is a CSS style attribute. I threw it in there even though we haven't talked about CSS just yet, because it really, it shows how rendering hierarchy really works, which is really a lot of the important part of knowing what a div is. So, hopefully you'll forgive me for dipping our toes into CSS just a little bit. Any other questions? So, now let's talk about lists. So, there are 2 forms of list which are commonly used. You have bullet lists and numbered lists. these two different types of lists are called in HTML land ordered lists and unordered lists. Ordered lists are numbered lists, unordered lists are bulleted lists. So, the way that you create an unordered list is using the UL tag. UL for unordered list. Now, it is not sufficient to only use UL. UL expects a sub tag called LI, or list item. LI, list item. What's a type of fruit?
Kiwi.
Kiwi. What's another type of fruit? You're not having to Google this, I hope.
Oranges.
Oranges. Yeah. Here we go. One more.
Dragon fruit.
Dragon fruit. There we go. Let's see how that renders. About how you would expect. Make sense? So far, not too difficult. Numbered lists. Are called ordered lists here. That's OL for ordered list. In the same way as unordered lists, they expect list items for the items of the list. What's the best video game?
Halo.
It's Factorio. You're wrong. But we can put Halo as number 2. What's the third best video game?
Ocarina of Time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were bringing out the big guns. There we
I was gonna say it was first, but you're the teacher, I didn't want to correct you.
go. I come from the era when, like, the big debate was, what is the best video game of all time? Ocarina of Time or Final Fantasy VII? And that mostly fell along the lines of who had an N64 and who had a PlayStation. Because Xbox wasn't there yet, didn't exist. You had 2 options. So,
But have you ever played Dark Cloud on the PlayStation?
never had a PlayStation.
It's my favorite PlayStation game. It's like
Yeah?
PS2, Dark Cloud, highly recommend.
PS2 was like, it's seemingly the golden era. The only PS2 game that I ever played was a re-release of the original Katamari game. There you go, numbered list, not that exciting. But still necessary for you to know how to make one. Alright? Shall we do tables? Tables are a bit more complicated. So you create a table with the table tag, as you might have guessed. So tables are a bit, they're a bit different in the way that they work. This is how they work. Let's say you have a table 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. A table, right? The entire table uses the table, right? The table and end table tags. The next level up is rows. Each one of these is a row. Except for the first one. These are all TR and TR. Forward slash there. TR and TR. TR and TR. The header row is TH. The header row is, it has a different tag so that it can be formatted differently using CSS rules. If you just, like in plain HTML, if you use TH for the first row, there's no visual difference between a TH and a TR. However, it means that in CSS you can make the header of the row look a bit different than you might otherwise. You can also, if you want, have multiple headers within the same table, right? Maybe, maybe you have a fairly large table and you want to do divisions between the different sections of the table. You could insert TH, table header, at various points to break the table up by sections. Make sense? Any questions? Good. So after that, we have to drill down one more layer to the level of individual cells. And you can imagine that this is the point at which people are like, really? Really? This is getting a bit tedious, isn't it? So each individual cell within the table starts TD and ends TD. And you must do that for every element of the blessed, accursed, very verbose table. Shall we make a table then? Table head and table head. TD 1, 2, 3. Now you may be saying to yourself, this has got to be the least compact table I've ever seen in my life. We have literally one element on each and every row. The fact is, I've actually done this for readability. If you really want to, because white space is gobbled, you could do it like this. The trick is, these lines will often get quite long. So it actually, as long as the contents of a cell is short enough, you can put them on one line if you wish, but if that content starts getting quite long, you'll want to bump that down to additional lines in the HTML source, just for neatness, right? So let's see how this renders. Well, well, well. Well, it's definitely something. So, no borders. No! No borders. Borders are styling. That's CSS's job. So, I'll give you just a teensy-weensy bit of CSS to put the borders in, okay? You make a style block at the top of the document. You say, I want list items, or not list items, I want table data to have border, 2 pixels, solid black. It at least has boxes now. If you apply that to the table as well, there you go. Now, why is it offset like that? It's strange. Am I not using TR correct? Or TH? Let me see here. Oh, I might be an old try T-head. I might be working off an older set of knowledge. Yeah, there we go. Sorry, folks, it's not TH, it's fed. T-head. Feed. There you go. Apologies.
Can you scroll back up to where you put in the style?
I certainly can. So, this, don't worry too much about the CSS for now, but that is what a CSS rule looks like. That's what we're going to be doing next week. Okay? Tables look like, they don't look very good without at least that much, so it was unfortunately necessary to throw that in. So, by the way, plain HTML tables look like garbage. Try to avoid using them at all costs. We will eventually show you how to I will eventually show you how to style them nicely using a front-end framework called Bootstrap, which makes the table look quite a bit less default HTML-y. Yeah, look forward to that. But even once we introduce that framework and once we've introduced the styling, it doesn't change the actual HTML. Like, the way that you write the table in HTML is this, no matter how you style it. Right? So, again, that's the division of labor between HTML and CSS, right? HTML is the content, CSS is the style. So, any questions about that? Seems pretty straightforward. Cool. Good. Knocking these off pretty quickly. We did lists, spans, divs, tables. Now we talk forms. So, forms are Forms are going to make more sense once we start talking about server-side programming. The thing about an HTML form is that fundamentally you are trying to package up information and kick it out to the server. Information which is received from the user, right? So, forms end up looking a fair amount like the Windows forms that we were doing last semester. Many of the same widgets are available in both places. We will be dealing with text boxes, we will be dealing with buttons, right? We won't really be dealing with labels because this is HTML and pretty much everything is a label, right? So let's do a basic form. And I'm going to, let's do this in the gallery page for no particular reason. Oh, you know that thing I said that VS Code will eventually betray me? It just betrayed me. Hooray! Betrayal! Or maybe it's, that's not right. Betrayal! Yeah. There we go. Now, I just need Mohawk apps again. There it is. Notepad++, please. Thank you. There we go. So, when we create a form, perhaps not surprisingly, everything gets wrapped inside of a form tag. Form components are called inputs. We then specify a type. For example, text box. Sorry, input type is text. Yes. Let's see what that, well, I'll give you one additional one. Input type is equal to submit. There you go. This is our form. If you want the elements of your form to appear on different lines, this is one place where, personally, I use break. Although perhaps I shouldn't. So, the question is, what happens if I use this? Hello, submit. I get an interesting little guy right there. Question mark. So, these inputs need more information. But once we've provided that information, we will be able to send information back to the server. We won't be able to use that information until we know some PHP, but we will be able to send it. Let's give it a name. Name is equal to input text. Now, when I hit the submit button, I recommend taking a look at what has happened to our URL, particularly that end bit. Question mark, input text is equal to ASDF, which is the what I entered into the text box. So this is known as a query parameter. These are fairly important. When you see a question mark occur in a URL, it means that everything past the question mark is essentially data which is being sent along with the request, right? So in this case, I am sending input text, and that has a value of ASDF. The server will then pick that up and say, ooh, okay, I'll do that with that. Query parameters. Query parameters only apply to GET requests, but let me give you a sort of in the wild example, all right? So let's go to the YouTube, and let's not frighten the child. There we go. So essentially, this music video, which has some of the best dancing that's ever existed, I'd like you to pay attention to the URL address bar here. You can see I have watch question mark v is equal to then this string, which as we all know is the YouTube string code for the Rickroll video, which by the way has 1,613,139,117 views. So essentially, the thing that makes this query parameter interesting is that I can then copy the URL, right? Open it in another tab, paste the same URL, and voila, I play the same video, right? Which is, of course, an essential component of the art of the Rickroll. You must actually get them to play the video. So, essentially, V means video, it's sending this code, it's telling the YouTube database which video to look up and play. Simple enough. Here's something that you may not have known that you can do with a YouTube video. Did you know that you can copy video URLs at a particular timestamp? If you right-click copy video URL at current time, well, it's doing this instead of like V, but V will also work. You get a T parameter, which is the time delay you want to, or like the time elapsed that you want to play the video at, right? 67, meaning 67 seconds. You can actually take this parameter, apply it here, and just to prove that it'll work, we'll put it here. And there you go, 67 seconds in, right? So, when we have a query string, like this, let's break down the anatomy of it slightly. First, the question mark itself means, of course, as I said previously, everything past this point is a query parameter. We then have two actual query parameters. The ampersand character is a separator, right? The ampersand character says, okay, I'm finished the first query parameter, now we're doing the second query parameter. These get parsed by the server in ways that we don't really have to worry about just yet. But you can see how that data is pulled out of the string, formed into variables, which we can then perform operations with on the server. Make sense? So that is what we are working with when we are working with forms. Make sense? There are many different types of form inputs. Which I'm not too proud to look up. Lots of them. So we can go through. We can try them out. So input type button, self-explanatory, produces a button, right? This is not normally like for the use of sending query parameters. Once we start doing JavaScript, one of the first things we'll do is learn how to hook a JavaScript function up to a button. You don't have to do a form to create a button. You can also just use the button tag. You'll see me do this a couple of times in class going forward. Checkboxes. We all know what a checkbox is. They're the square ones, right? Color is a color picker. You know the color picker dialog? Date and date time bring up the calendar where you can select a date. We'll skip email, file, hidden. Oh, hidden is kind of interesting actually. Hidden just doesn't show up. So if you want to attach additional data to the form, but that the user isn't interacting with, you can use a hidden form element. Just keep in mind that any user who knows how to use the elements page, the inspector, can reveal any of your hidden inputs. Number is like a number with the up and down ticks or the ability to increase or decrease number. That's one. Let's do it. Let's put a number in there. Input type is equal to number. Name is equal to my num. There we go. There you go. You can see with the second element here. If I try typing alphabetic characters, I get nothing. If I try numbers, I get numbers. I can then increase or decrease. That's a number control. It's entirely likely that even some of these that you're hearing about for the first time, there is probably some way of doing it inside Windows Forms. These input types are pretty standard across most types of forms that you would find. Password is kind of interesting. We'll be using it a little bit later in the course, well, a lot later in the course. Input type is equal to password. So password you can type, but it gives you those little dots, right? Now, just because it has the little dots doesn't mean that your your password is completely protected. Because if you take a look in the inspector, you can always edit this to text, which reveals whatever you entered in the password, right? This is roughly equivalent to the idea of like, you know the little eye icon that a lot of password entry has where you can see your password temporarily? It's basically doing this but in JavaScript, right? In fact, it wouldn't be difficult for us to write a little bit of JavaScript to do exactly that once we get there. Make sense? So far so good? Range is kind of interesting. So a range is one of these slide bars. There's one attribute which now that I've done range, I should show you. I'll show you a few attributes. I will start though with value. So value is either, so when you're defining it in HTML, value is the initial value of the form element. I did turn that on, didn't I? Yes, I did. Okay, good. So for example, if I wanted input texts field to default with a value of hello, friend. If I wanted range to default with a value of 2, that is entirely possible. Our values have been populated into our form. Make sense? With ranges, you also get to define a minimum and a maximum. Say, min is equal to 0, max is equal to 10. And you can see that now that the range is a lot smaller, your range counter here is definitely flipping between individual values. It's now like obvious in the interface. We can also, like, if you want that to be even more obvious, if you bring that down to 5, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another clever little JavaScript thing you can do to sort of improve the appearance of this control is to have JavaScript output what the actual numeric value of that slide control is at any given time. Maybe make a little span here, drop that number in. As this changes, you can put the update the page with that number, just to make it a little more user-friendly. You're not actually, like, without the number indicated, you don't actually know what number you've selected, right? Yes?
Just an interesting point of the name of things, maybe equals input text, maybe equals final. Is that just so you can like reference it later?
Yes. Also, these are names, right? When you send the query parameter, if you look even at the URL we have right now, the name is the name of the variable that gets sent to the server. If you don't specify name, there is no name, the data doesn't get sent. Make sense? So basically, I've been doing things a little bit quickly here. All inputs inside of forms need name. It's mandatory for all of them. Except for the submit button. By the way, with the submit button, the value is actually the button text, strangely. So there you go. Text is obvious. Yeah, that's probably fine. So my recommendation, if you're putting together HTML web forms, which you will need to do for particular assignments in this class, if you feel you want a checkbox, highly recommend going to this page on W3 Schools. Take a look. Take a look at the code that they give you. Copy it, paste it, modify the values. Okay? Another thing that I should talk about is labels. You may have noticed it's kind of hard to fill in a form when you're just confronted with a bunch of boxes that don't say anything, right? Labels are how you present like non-input element text associated with the input element, right? So let's create a label. For, and this is also where the names come in. In order to label something, you need to refer to it by its name. So, for equals input text. Name and label. There we go. You can do that for this one. My num age. Create a label for each of the named input elements. You don't have to do this with buttons typically, but everything else should have a label. Save. And when we view the web page, there you have it. Now once again, this is rather ugly. Alright? And once again, That is CSS's job to make it look less ugly. While it is ugly, it is functional. Make sense? So, my name is Nick. My name is 36. My secret wizard name is a secret. And I have this many magic beans. There you go. And now, you can see what I entered in for all of my parameters, including which one that you're probably not supposed to see? The password. Uh-oh.
Oh.
Da 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 da. Or what is it? The da 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 da. So the reason that this happens, right? We are using what's called a GET request method. Now, in networking, did they discuss HTTP request methods?
Probably.
Probably. Okay, so this is the part where I let's recap just a tiny amount of networking. So, don't worry. We are still software people. I still generally don't care how the network works, okay? But there is some portion of it that is important. So, what does the network send? How is information communicated? No, like when I send a little chunk of information from this server to that, from this router to that router, what do you call that? The little chunk of information that travels through the network. Not bits. Starts with a P. Packet, yes. So inside of the HTTP packet, right? There are broadly, there might be more regions than this, but there are two regions inside of the HTTP packet, right? What are they? Say louder.
Header?
The header is one, yes. And the other? Do we remember what it's called? The footnote. That's a good guess. Also starts with a P. The payload. Did they use this term in networking?
Probably.
Probably. So we have the header and we have the payload. In general, the header contains the routing information for the packet, right? How do I get where I'm going, says the packet. The header says, I will tell you. The payload is the information being transmitted, broadly speaking. The header is not encrypted in HTTPS, right? In order to send a packet through the network infrastructure, route it, bounce it off all those routers and switches and all of that, the routers and switches that compose the network are like, they must know where the packet is supposed to go, therefore that information cannot be encrypted, right? And you can't even rely on a packet going the same way through a network twice, right? The request packet might take a different route than the response packet, right? So, header, not encrypted. the payload is encrypted. Right? Like the whole purpose of like the TLS handshake is to set up corresponding encryption keys on the client and the server so that they can communicate in an encrypted manner without having anybody in the middle being able to decrypt the packet, at least if you're not dealing with a man-in-the-middle attack, right? So, we have a couple of HTTPS request methods. The request method is like, it doesn't change the packet. It's a parameter inside of the packet. It's like one field in the packet says what the request method is. In our case, we are concerned with either get or post. Default in HTML forms is get. What we just witnessed here is a get response, right? This is the get method. So the get method places parameters in the header. In fact, it URL encodes them. It puts them in the very URL, right? This is not encrypted. This is not secure. Nevertheless, if you want a shareable link, you need to use this, right? So we use get, and we use the non-encrypted header when the information we're sending is not sensitive, right? But if the information is sensitive, we use, can anybody guess? Post, that's right. Post. Post places its information inside of the encrypted header. Or payload, pardon me. The way that you change this on an HTML form is very easy. Method is post. Now, if we reload the page, you can see that, let me reload the page without this bit. There we go. You can see, I click the button, and whatever my password is not put in the URL, right? If we take a look at the network, click. The other thing that we notice is that every time we click the button, even though it doesn't appear so, we are actually reloading the page, right? There is a way to configure this in JavaScript so that it doesn't reload the page when you click on a submit button on a form, but for now, we're not there yet. Class is almost over. There is one more important thing about forms that I have to say in the next 2 minutes, and that is when you send information to the server, you send it along with the request for a file, right? You can actually select which file you are sending this information to. Most of the time this will be a PHP file, when you're programming in PHP at least. When PHP is your server-side language, it's the one that you target. Action. But it doesn't have to be a PHP file, it can actually be anything. Let's say I want this submit button to redirect me to the home page. Action index.html. There we go. Reload. And when we click this, we are brought back to the home page. So form action is a bit like a link, right? It's a bit like the href on a link. You can specify something else on the server to send that information to. Does that make sense? Now, this stuff does not work at all. Sending form data does not work in local mode. You must be on the server, like an actual live server, or you must be emulating a server. Otherwise, you're not going to be running PHP scripts. Your computer's file system is not going to run PHP scripts for you. You need a special program for that called XINF, which we will learn how to install and use once we actually get there in the course. You will be seeing more of forms. Consider this more of an introduction to forms than, the final word on forms. We'll be seeing more of them as we go through the course. So if this was a little confusing, we will be, we will have opportunities for review in the future. Does that make sense? Any questions? Shall we get out of here then?
Can I quickly just see your code for the action?
Oh yes, of course.
Are you able to post it?
Yeah, I'll post the code.
Thank you.
There we go. It's simple, it's just action and then in quotes the name of the thing you're sending the information to. Okay. All right, class is dismissed.